let's get into this conversation about nonlinear learning, because I think it's, well, I don't want to speak for any listeners, speak for you or anything like that. But what I can tell you is, as like a STEM kid who went to a STEM focused university all about engineering, all this kind of stuff, right? Like, oh, nonlinearity is kind of, yeah, sure, that comes up sometimes, but most things follow the rule. And that's not the human experience at all, right? Maybe when you're building a bridge or whatever it is that you're doing. But that engineering thing of 10% more effort leads to 10 or 20% more gains or whatever. Like, well, no, we both know that I don't want to say it's not true. The context in which that's true is such a small part of the context in which we live our lives, such a limited context, right?
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, it's totally true that like if I have a full coffee instead of a half a cup of coffee, then, there will be some incremental change in blah, 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 blah. But the bigger issue is if I'm scared about what I'm doing, it's not going to go in the right way. If I'm hungry, if I'm tired, if I'm, whatever, I'm going to miss it entirely. It's not going to be 10% less. It's going to be like no lesson learned.
No, absolutely. And I just think that, for me, so it's kind of like trying to teach myself a song on the guitar that's just too challenging for me, or I pick up like, I have a Spanish tutor. I've had one for a while, and we're taking a break right now, but we're reading, and this guy's like very bright guy who's telling me we're reading Proust in Spanish, but he's originally French.
Whoa.
And this is tough. I'm like, put it aside, go off somewhere else, come back, more context. Oh, not too bad, kind of thing. And it's the same thing just with like the frameworks of like, hey, pretty much all heavy machinery. For example, I had this excavator out last night, like in the middle of the night, because I was just like, oh my God, I got to get this done before they bring it back from the farm the next morning, because I'm trying to build my mud home. So I'm digging up dirt and, and all of that. And, it's just, you start to realize all this stuff is like pretty related, has the same philosophy. And by like, saying put that aside, come back to it later, you start to like really think critically faster in the right way, rather than like hitting your head up against the wall, which what I'm used to. So it's like, I think it's like this kind of multi-contextualization that's really helpful for both just like the learner, and because I think part of it is when I'm thinking of Umwelt, I think part of the issue is with what you're talking about from the beginning, which is getting the wrong idea about someone and then starting to interpret their actions in the wrong way, afterward, right. Is that there's just a natural lack of focus on one's own kind of participation in that engagement, right? So in other words, that like, hey, just like the simple thing of like, I may have made a misjudgment there, right? Like that doesn't even occur to us as a natural process, right? It has to be like a conscious effort, right? To kind of tease out that blind spot. And I think that's the thing that's more helpful when, when you have some kind of, what is it? It's kind of like a reference to my fasting, but like, just extreme abstinence from a certain context, because your brain is like, what's going on? Like it's not like, and so for example, seeing a person in an entirely new context will kind of get you to start to like have a more highly sensitized learning experience, where it's not just focus on the external world, but also how you relate to that external world. So let me just give you like a more concrete example, because that can be a little bit theoretical. Okay. So it's kind of a funny one. So like I've had and I don't know if like I'm thinking about saying this on a podcast, but you know, so especially in breaking up with my past two girlfriends, one was a fiance, and then my most recent ex-girlfriend, found myself doing psychedelics, just as like a part of like a, you know, like trying to expand my mind about what the future could be like, who I am, and all of that. So
now wait, are we talking about psychedelics as like after a difficult breakup, or as a lead up to like where
after
timeline this for me?
Yeah. So after, so imagine like I'm like, so especially with my fiance, who I was like, this is who I'm going to be with, you know, that I'm going to marry this person, and then whoosh, this is part of when I was really sick in that very moldy house. So my world was falling apart, and I found myself. Yeah, and it just like, so it was actually three things. One, I'm like, I don't feel good, you know, at some level. Two,
right,
it's kind of that like same experience of walking to, you know, you're in school and you realize I forgot to wear pants kind of thing. In the same way, like I misinterpreted this whole relationship, you know, and with my own ex-fiance, made way too many assumptions about where we were, because I was so busy and stressed trying to get Streamline off the ground. And so I was just so focused on that. And I remember I was like reinvesting money in the technology. I had gone to this ed tech business plan competition at Penn and totally bombed there. You know, did terribly. Like I had to develop, basically our lead developer should never have presented, you know, because he was not a presenter, you know, and I'm needing to be thinking more, more aware of that kind of stuff. And so, my own nerves at that point in my life and me being sick really kind of caused the presentation to go poorly, but it couldn't compare to showing up home, and she had like packed up all her things. So I'm like, oh, failure, boom, 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 boom.
Oh, wow.
So I was like, you know, and then, I got bitten by a brown recluse spider, which is when my whole system got, and my whole system went backwards after that. Was the mold toxins. I mean, it's multiple sources. So usually takes a lot to take me down, but it got me. Yeah.
That sounds like a lot. Yeah. Yeah.
But all that's to say is that, you know, my Umwelt was unchecked because I was so stressed for so long that I hadn't taken the time to like really think from my own fiance's perspective and see where she was at. Meanwhile, she was psychologically not doing great from it. But this was all a lead in to talk about why I did psychedelics.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Which was, I think, I didn't realize it at the time, but I experienced what this scientist, her name is Gul Dolan, who I listened to a podcast on with Tim Ferriss recently, Hopkins PhD researcher doing the psychedelics thing. She's saying what people are experiencing is a reawakening of critical periods of learning. And what I'm noticing with that, and so, because like my relationship to my environment, who I think I am, you know, it's often like couched in your relationships with people, especially your significant others. So I'm like, who the hell am I? You know, like I don't have a mirror anymore. That's very consistent. So, you know, I found myself doing that and realizing like, whoa, like how many things I had taken for granted. With my most recent girlfriend, I did this like several months ago, and I'll never forget. I was like, my truck that I'd gotten for the land to get the farm off the ground. Her dad had purchased it for me, like kind of as like a gift while we were together. And so like I took mushrooms, which you can buy from any DC kind of dispensary these days. It's crazy. It's all like right across the street kind of thing. And it was the funniest thing. I looked at the car and I was like, this does not look like my truck. And then I was thinking, well, from his perspective, my girlfriend's dad's perspective, ex-girlfriend, it is definitely not my truck. But I was thinking about, like, you know, that feeling of home, and on a very literal level, how it has to do with also this assumed your engagement, the observer, that's very static. And when critical learning periods are really happening, there's this more dynamic observation of self in connection with the outside world. And that's the key piece that's causing people to learn way faster, because they're not making as many assumptions about themselves, the observer. They're kind of more in this, you know, open state around that. And I think that's a big piece that people are missing. But I feel like, you know, what you were talking about being like, this was a hard but good learning experience from the beginning. And why was it hard but good? Because it checked the observer, you know, and not just another thing within the outside world that works within your current Umwelt. Does that make sense to you, Wes? Yeah. Could you break that down?
It does.
What did I say?
I want to try and reframe it a couple different ways. I think that what you said is quite clear, and it resonates for me as well. And I want to reframe it because seeing it from a couple different perspectives is one of the ways I know I can lock something in a little bit better for myself.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, you kind of play with the toy and you see it from a couple different, and then you're more familiar with it, kind of thing. You know.
Sure.
So. Yeah. Absolutely agree, and I think you hit the nail on the head that my own inability to watch my own, to treat myself objectively instead of subjectively, right? So that brings up for me this, not to be all highfalutin about it, but this thing called the fundamental attribution error, which George Carlin said it so well when he said, "Have you ever noticed how your shit is stuff and everyone else's stuff is shit?" That's the fundamental attribution error. More technically, it's the cognitive bias that leads you to assume that bad behavior by other people is due to a character flaw, and bad behavior by you is circumstantial. Okay? If they're speeding, they're a bad driver. If you're speeding, you have a good reason to be in a rush. Okay, and it's like everyone does it to some degree, right? But that's a thing that happens, and it's the same thing, right? Like if there's a miscommunication, then they must be wrong on some level, or I must be in an unusual circumstance. And to your point, it's like maybe they're having they are entitled to have bad circumstances, and you are entitled to be wrong. Like you could just be, you could have a bad, observation, whatever, right? Like it goes both ways. So that's one thing. And then when you brought up critical learning period, it reminds me, we were talking earlier about how, you're in some experience and you're not paying attention to most of what it is, right? You have these automatic processes that filter away the stuff that's irrelevant. Like I'm only dimly aware of the color of this room because it's the same color that it's been for years. I like the color. I don't pay attention to it, right? Like I like it, but it's not a focus for me. Okay. Mm-hmm. And so it would be easy to imagine that I could wear some shirt that looks bad with that color background because I'm not really seeing the color it's not that I'm blind to it. It's just that I'm not paying attention to it. Right. And so this, God, I don't remember what class I took or what it was, but there's this idea that the brain is super, super diligent about not wasting energy. Like there's this really strong drive for your brain to not do anything it doesn't have to do. Brains are lazy, and that's a benefit, right? Otherwise, you'd need too much food to keep your brain running. Like your brain uses up more of your blood sugar, of your energy than you would imagine. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And we know that from training kids to go through 4 hours of difficult thinking at an SAT, whatever. It's like, yeah, you burn more calories than you would think just sitting in the chair. Right. Anyway.
Yeah. You feel like get hit by a truck. It makes sense. Like
yeah, exactly.
Feel very drained after that. Yeah.
You have
absolutely.
This physical reaction. Yeah. It's because it's physically taxing to think hard for a long period of time. Okay. There's nothing moving per se in there, but it still burns a lot of energy. Anyway. Where was I? Oh, yeah. It's the idea that when you're learning something new, you are aware that you do not yet know what parts to pay attention to. And so you are not filtering as hard because you're trying to figure out what the relevant parts are. So you're taking it all in, and that's of course exhausting, but you're taking it all in. Whereas if you're in a situation where you feel like it's you've been there before, you're used to it, it's a familiar location, it's a familiar pattern, then you are necessarily shutting out inputs that your brain is interpreting as wasteful. And that seems to be related to me, right? You do psychedelics and suddenly you're reinterpreting everything. That one of the effects of psychedelics, as I understand it, is to kind of tweak your brain's either ability or tendency to filter, right? And you take in more stuff, right? You have a richer experience in part because more of what's going on around you is actually getting all the way through, which is itself exhausting, which is why we don't do it all the time. But it's also, it can be a very powerful, enlightening experience to be like, oh, my brain was keeping me from seeing this thing because my brain thought it was irrelevant. I don't think it's irrelevant. I think it's crucial. And I was missing it this whole time, right? And to me, it comes right back to the situation I was talking about at the top of our conversation, where I was having this conversation with this guy and I thought I was super clear on what he was saying, and I was wrong because I wasn't taking in anyway.
Well, it makes me think. So my latest strategy for that is whenever I feel like something negative about someone, and I always get these email writing hands where I'm like, I need to say something to help this person understand what's going on, that they're, kind of thing. And so let me show you what you're missing. Exactly. Because I'm as a tutor, I'm very good at showing people what you're missing. So this is just a favor for you. Let me just explain this.
Oh my God. Oh, it hurts so much. It's so funny because it's true. Go on. I'm going to sit with my discomfort as you tell this very good story.
Exactly. No, this is actually me, the conqueror, actually conquering this side of myself, which has been really tough. But really, and I had a life coach for a while who's just really pushed this idea through, which is the outside world is a mirror to you. If you're really adamant about saying something to someone, just think about how could this very message, the exact one, different context, apply to yourself. Because there might be a reason why you're so angry about it, and it doesn't have to do with them. It has to do with some other thing that you're ignoring about yourself. And that's why it's triggering this huge response, because you're frustrated with yourself at some level. And what I found was, and it was kind of similar in that, so I was thinking about theory of mind and kind of how we decide, people decide to relate to one another. And, there's collaborative and then there's kind of competitive. And the competitive mindset is kind of feels like a hunter's mindset from way back when, right? That we're kind of watching what someone else is doing and focusing on moments to capitalize, right? And I got just so upset with other people my own tutors treating me that way, being fundamentally lazy brain. I'm going to do the things that I think are important, and otherwise I'm just going to use you for the things that are going to help me, and not really realizing that hey, we could really take advantage of this opportunity and this tutoring company and forget the money stuff. Let's learn from each other and not just make this a zero-sum game kind of situation. Let's really take this further, what we're doing right here. And I realized that I'm oh, I set the precedent for that when I was really stressed, when I was spending, because I'm not someone who's oh yeah, profit margin, let me just stack cash for myself. I'm spending money in ridiculous ways because of some crazy idea. I'm just hey, let's see if this could work, kind of thing, and not really doing a great job in terms of having creativity over here and business stuff over there, kind of being a little messy with the two, and that causing me to act like someone who I'm not, because I'm usually very hey, well, I care about you outside of what's beneficial to me. But as soon as you start stressing yourself out and for me, fiance leaves, these things where I'm just like,
Sure.
smaller world, more and more stressed, kind of like, it's and the thing that's challenging is that once you start that cycle, it takes a while, even if you've changed yourself, it takes a while for other people to not see you that way, and it can trap you in that very identity because people are just expecting you that way, and you're like, well, I'm just gonna act that way because you're already expecting me to be that way, that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
and,
I mean, part of the I don't want to say purpose, but like one of the effects of friendship and community is that people see you for who you are and help you reinforce your identity. But if they've got the wrong idea, or if you've given them the right idea for reasons that you think are wrong, or like whatever, they'll reinforce that identity too, And oh my gosh, for sure. For sure. And there was something else that you said that I thought was really, when you started talking about the world as a mirror, it brought back something that came up in this uncomfortable conversation I was relaying, which is there was a point where I was talking to this guy and he was saying, it sounds to me like you're not giving me the opportunity to do XYZ thing because you're afraid of the possibility that I will get it wrong. Okay. And that's just like that I hear those words and I'm like, that is so contrary to my values. Like, of course, experiment, fail, all that kind of stuff. But I really sat with what he was saying because he was experiencing that I was afraid of him doing it wrong. And I realized you could have stopped that sentence at I'm afraid. It's not about you and my interpretation of what you will do. It's that I'm coming from a place of fear instead of a place of learning and abundance and everything's going to be okay and safety and security. And therefore, I've created an environment here where you feel less secure in your ability to do stuff as part of the team. And it's like, oh, God, cardinal rule. Like, It's so,
it is so tough. And it's just, I think, highlights kind of how impact. I think that's something that's always surprised me is how much I impact other people. Like, I'm always like, but saying things very directly sometimes and just being like, "Ooh, they weren't ready for it that way," and realizing that after the fact and all that. But I think all just umwelts colliding can always be a challenging thing. You have to make sure people are in the right headspace for it. And I think it does go back to that idea where that we mentioned about like kind of just assuming it's the good thing and laughing like everyone's part of the joke and like, kind of thing, just in general, just if there's any kind of conflict being like, there must, but I think I just applaud you, Wes, in terms of like, we're kind of skipping over the fact that Wes is being very humble in the way he's describing all this. And I think this is how you get out of the scapegoating process, right? Of being like, it's because it's basically Othello and Iago saying, your employee's like, he's like doing all the wrong things, but really he's trying to act more and more within the framework that he thinks you want from him, and it's like kind of like the Desdemona whole thing. And just this whole experience of Wes wakes up, he laughs about it, all of that. That's the difference. That's learning, difference between tragedy, not having a friend, and comedy. Like, wasn't that a funny time when we thought we were enemies back then, or having a hard time, or whatever. So, I think it's people humility, biggest piece, as that's what counts here for learning. And I think a lot of very smart people are just like, I know everything. I'm fine. I'm good. I know everything. Kind of like I already know. And it just undercuts the whole Umwelt kind of awareness of that. It's always limited somehow.
I think you're absolutely right. And I, as much as I appreciate the kind words, I hasten to point out there would have been a lot more comedy and a lot less tragedy in my story if I'd come to this place a long time ago. You know what I mean? Like, I appreciate your reinforcing the fact that, bringing humility to this and looking at myself was very, very powerful. But I had help in doing that, and it took a long time. And I'd love to be able to lean into it a little bit harder and, cause upset for shorter and shorter periods of time before I kind of come correct in these situations. And, oh, my God. I mean, that's whatever. Learning is part of life, but so I guess what I'm saying is I'm in very strong agreement with you that the more we can lean into that learning, whatever that may mean, the better off we all are.
Absolutely. Well, we could wrap it up there if you want. I mean, I could throw in so many.
Oh no, yeah, I'm counting on you to be able to. Yeah, no, let's. I think that's a lovely capstone. I really appreciate your spending the time and energy here with me, and it's really it's encouraging and inspiring and even vindicating, right, to me that we're converging on some of these topics, because our livelihood depends on helping younger people do better in these very narrow intellectual contexts. And it's interesting that we've both, on our own paths, come to this realization that, like, it isn't just a narrow intellectual path. Like, it really is a bigger part of life, and we can benefit from some of the lessons that we've painstakingly learned so we can give them in these narrow contexts. And it's like, oh, actually, this applies to me too. I could get some benefit out of
absolutely
taking advantage of some of these. Yeah.
That's what I've been telling my tutors. I'm like saying, use tutoring as an opportunity to like use it as like a mirror to your own brain health, honestly. And because and like specifically its relationship to whether your heart's online or not, meaning like, are you present, or are you having something that's pushing you off the present? And then are you really paying attention to the other person, or are you just waiting for them to finish so you can say the next thing, Or are you, are you building off of like what their cave reality? Are you scratching at, that edge of the caves to see like what light comes in
like
the right way?
Plato and the shadows, is that where you're?
Oh, well, yeah, kind of like, I've been using that kind of cave metaphor of like, cause you can't just like, here it is, right? It's not going to stick that way. You have to make it hard. You have to scratch and be like, hey, what's that over there? Kind of thing. And be aware of like what cave they're in. I think that like, but the biggest piece though is that these smart kids who I think are brokenhearted somehow, or at least just kind of have this, I think I would say by the time I was a freshman in high school, I had this what do you call it? Like filter that made me cool. What is that called? Like a blasé attitude, basically, about things that I'm already overlaying on the already existing filter of being like filtering out even more. Makes me cooler and more socially accepted. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
And so I don't know. I just think that just blowing that up for kids as a mentor and making something else real that's based in like an authentic. Hey, we're all have blind spots, and the key is we're learning from each other and helping and finding the intersection of our perspectives. There's something powerful there with that. And I think like, damn, I'm glad I'm doing that with you now in broader ways that are like, I think that's like, it's just so helpful because I'm starting to notice myself not do as much dumb shit that causes me more pain.
Yeah. That's funny. I often say, mostly in my inside voice, but occasionally to other close friends and colleagues, that the key to being a genius is just do less dumb shit.
The mental effort, like, right, imagine catching yourself how much time you might spend. Well, screw that guy who's like, never, like in the hours, like kind of thing, right? That's when I'm starting to catch myself as if I start doing the blah 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 blah, like, and to the point where I start missing perceptual data, or I am like I'm talking so loud in my head that I'm almost talking out loud because I'm like da 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 da. That's when I know right there. Don't trust that, Ian, because there's a level of to that there's, it can't be a true balance of perspectives. It must be me revved up, activated, fictionalizing based on my lack of data.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh God, such a good conversation. I can hardly wait till next time.